As we talked about 2 days ago, on Wednesday, for the first time in history, the two sides in Cyprus, the Turkish Cypriot and the Greek Cypriot leader, presented their preferred maps of the internal administrative border to each other. That has never ever happened before, and it was quite an important momentum, both in itself, but also because it was seen by both sides as a sign that this thing is moving towards the end game. And the day after, yesterday, we convened the conference on Cyprus with the Cypriots, together with the three guarantor powers as the participants, and in the presence of the European Union as an observer, with the President of the Commission, Juncker, and High Representative Federica Mogherini also in the room. We had a very good series of opening statements that I listened very carefully to. They all conveyed a strong message of hope that this long-standing dispute can now finally be laid to rest, and united federal Cyprus can emerge and also be embraced in a security arrangement that is mutually acceptable for all sides, hence the involvement of the guarantor powers, but also hence the role of the European Union, to which United Cyprus will belong. And this was the common message in the opening statements. We moved from there to a working lunch where we went more into the actual substance of the issues, and it was a good exchange. It was an open and frank exchange, and it was an exchange that confirmed to us all, I think, two things. First, that there are difficult issues to overcome, but secondly, that there is a will to overcome them from all the participants and all the people present in that lunch. From then on, we went to have another first, third historic first in a row, which was the first time the three guarantor powers met with the Secretary General in this process, first together to discuss the issues of how to organize their involvement in this conference as it goes along, but also after that a series of bilateral meetings with all of them. And then we reconvened in the afternoon and the evening session, and the outcome, as you will have seen, is that the conference continues. The next event in this conference is a meeting that will take place already on Wednesday, where senior civil servants will come together from the same parties to start working on specific ideas, specific possible options, possible proposals, not to negotiate, but to prepare the ground for a structured final discussion between the principals at the very high political level, which will take place later. We deliberately do not have a date, but it's going to be soon. I mean, the agreement by everybody is that we're talking about not a very long time, and maybe even in the course of this month. But this is not finally decided, because we have to see how this next round goes. So it's important for me to convey that the conference convened. It convened successfully. It continues as is normal in these conferences, and we do many of them in the United Nations. They now started with the presence of the high political level. It continues by civil servants, and it will then again be set at the probably even higher political level when time is ripe, either for sealing an agreement or when you need the involvement of the highest decision makers to actually craft an agreement, but then based on a series of concrete ideas which at that time will be on paper. And I'd like to say a few words of what the discussion is all about, because I think that's crucial. Like, of course, I'm not going to say what the positions of any side is, but it's important to understand that the Cyprus talks in general have 6 chapters. 5 of them pertains to the Cypriots only and are negotiated in Cyprus between the leaders, between Mr. Anastasio and Mr. Akinci. And we are close to conclusion, but we haven't completely concluded here, because there are issues in those 5 chapters that can only be finally closed when we know what's happening also on the 6th chapter, which is security and guarantees. And the security and guarantees chapter is in its nature an issue that relates to outside powers. This is a legacy of the 1960 treaties by which Cyprus was originally created, and it's impossible to either change, abolish, or continue. Well, you can continue, but you cannot do anything else if you don't have the consent of the guarantor powers. And as I mentioned, it's the observer role of the EU, because the EU will be important also in this aspect, particularly after the Lisbon Treaty. So that's why this chapter is somewhat different than the others. So the Conference of Cyprus is now continuing, and when the guarantor powers are involved, the topic is on security and guarantees, because the guarantor powers neither should or want to be involved in the issues that are not related to them. But in parallel, the two sides will continue to close outstanding issues because of this interdependent nature of issues. So it's under the roof of a Conference of Cyprus, we have both phenomena going on in parallel, and that's the way it should be. We're happy where we are now. We have this group established. We have had initial exchanges because they were all here with the people who will populate this senior civil servants group, and we're talking about very high officials from foreign ministries and prime minister's office and similar, in addition, of course, to the sites and ourselves from the UN. And what they are doing now as they fly home is to, or for that sake continue here, is that they are now preparing themselves for what will happen from Wednesday on, and the meeting that will start on Wednesday. I mean, or the session of the Conference on Cyprus, rather, that will start on Wednesday, will then try to be much more specific on the issues. And the reason I'm underlining in some detail this interrelationship is because it's important to understand that security is about many things. And you can, the sense of security that Cypriots, be they Greek Cypriots or Turkish Cypriots, need to feel is not only related to issues that of military nature. So the first line of defense, in many ways, in my view, and this is my view based on the inputs that we've been having over the last day, but I refer it's my view, but it's inspired by the conversations everybody has belonged to be a little bit precise, is that there is a level of, the first level is the deal itself. The ability to say that the federal constitution is credible, that it will last, that it will work, and that people are treated equally and are protected and have their rights protected under the constitution. So the first necessity is that people actually believe in a solution. That's the first layer of security. The second layer of security is, as in any country, internal security, meaning everything from a legal system, a judiciary that works, that is effective, that is fair, and that basically implements the rule of law. And for those who do not necessarily take the point, the police, who will then be helpful in implementing the rule of law, which is of course important also in the prospect of a reintegration of communities that have been living largely apart from each other, which means people will be living around the island, and that will be, you know, local minorities, local majorities, depending on where you are, and that also needs some kind of oversight, particularly in an introductory phase. This is something we know from other examples. And only after these two layers, we have the issue of whether people believe that the deal will be implemented. And both sides are raising certain concerns about whether, you know, they're saying we might get a good deal on paper, but how do we know that these things will actually happen? They will have different asks, but both sides have certain things they want to secure or want to assure or safeguard. And since implementation will take some time, we need some kind of security of implementation. And only after that comes the issue of external security. What will be the way a united federal Cyprus deal with its, you know, security and related aspects of foreign policy in, of course, a volatile region, which has unfortunately many even bigger problems than the one that we are facing on Cyprus, which after all is peaceful in nature, even if it's an unresolved conflict. So the idea now is that we will, rather than just rehearsing the old scripts and reading from paper or notes that have been around for decades, we will now try to decompose these different elements together, not to negotiate them, but try to look into the different components of this, and to try to understand, hopefully with the help of some good research which has been done, what are Cypriots actually worried about, and are the worries necessarily solved by the current answers, or I mean, are the current answers the right answers in the 21st century, or do we want to adapt them? We don't, of course, in principle, we may have the instruments, we may have to abolish the instruments, we may have to change them, and the sides have not, of course, not concluded on this because we just started. But I'm very inspired by not only what happened in the meeting itself, but also the series of bilaterals that the Secretary General and I had with all interested parties in order to start laying out the groundwork for what is going to be a difficult, important, and I would probably also quite inspiring process in trying to get a new way, to establish a new way of thinking around these issues, and then on this basis try to negotiate final positions. Not easy, but the will is there, is my message. But I would like to underline again, before I open the floor, or we open the floor, that the series of events that I just described has not happened before. You know, those of you who are not from Cyprus might be aware, because all Cypriots know by heart, but the rest of you need to know that there have been a long series of negotiation attempts. You know, there's half a century of history of trying to solve the Cyprus problem. So not everything is new under the sun, but the things I mentioned now, this map exchange, the fact that the guarantors are in the meeting with the Cypriots, the fact that we now are setting up this structured conversation about the security itself is new. It has not happened in this form, and this is something I really want to take note of. And all of this is first and foremost thanks to the leadership of the two leaders, Anastasiadis and Mr. Anastasiadis and Mr. Kinshi, but also for the active support of the other participants, and again, I would say the European Union, who is a constructive observer in this process. And I want to really pay tribute to all of them. I also want to use this opportunity to say that we must not lose any time. And I really hope that all interested parties know that they are reflecting and preparing themselves for the meetings that will start on Wednesday. Use that time optimally. There's not many days, and I think there's a momentum now, and I think larger political developments remind us that it's probably, or quite securely, very important that we use these common days as effectively as we can, and in as an constructive spirit as possible, a spirit of mutual understanding, respect. It's perfectly possible to be proudly defending your own position, while also understanding that other people can have another position without necessarily having an evil intent. And this is what we're seeing here, and I think this is possible, but it will be hard. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Eide. Okay, let's start with BBC. I'll do the tour. Imogen, please introduce yourself for Mr. Eide.
BBC. It sounds very promising, positive, constructive, yet just in the last hour, President Erdogan seems to have thrown a bit of a hand grenade into your negotiations, saying that Turkey will be in Cyprus forever. Can you react to that, please?
I'm not going to say very much right now, because we are actually in a dialogue with Turkey on a constant basis here. This may be, surrounding the discussion about for format yesterday, there were some exchanges which were not on substance, which might have inspired a reaction. I think I have no sign of the conversation I've been having until a few minutes ago that the process as such is in any kind of trouble. But of course we take note of this, and I mentioned a few seconds ago that the larger political developments in the neighborhood reminds us that one should not lose any time, and that was one of the reasons I mentioned that.
The gentleman.
Thank you. Olcay Kıraç from Turkish Radio and Television. Mr. Eide, when we were coming to Geneva, everybody expected an uninterrupted, on the highest level of meeting. Now what we are facing is an interrupted, take a break for a couple of days, and right after that, on the church level meeting. And what kind of a contribution can it make to this process? And are you satisfied with the developments, and can you encourage the people in order to be optimistic now?
Yeah, you suggested that everybody expected that. I did not. I mean, and I'm on record because I was here with you saying that a perfectly possible outcome is that we convene, we have initial discussions, and then we define work. I have almost no experience of a conference which is all constantly taking place at the highest level without then a lot of prior preparations, which in this context was not possible because of the interrelationship between the first and the second part. So I think there was a shared agreement that this is the way to do it. Some delegations wanted to start right now, today. One delegation asked for a few days to prepare. That's not particularly dramatic. We are starting on Wednesday, that's in 4 or 5 days from now. And it's a continuous process, and the conference is open. It's just that it happens in sessions, and with the ambition to be closed within reasonably short time.
Okay, Laurent, introduce yourself.
Laurent Siro, Swiss news agency, kind of follow up on that. Is there a risk from your perspective that that working group won't manage to find an agreement on that roadmap to prepare the more structure and again political talks? And second question, could we imagine that Imogen spoke about the comments on that presence of the Turkish soldier? Could we imagine that there might be two tracks talks with moving forward on the easiest issue and keeping that one, which is apparently the most critical for a later stage?
The security and guarantees chapter, as I said, is complicated and emotional, and the traditional opening positions are far apart. But it's not that many issues. I mean, there's a question about, basically it's a question about what happens to the treaties of 1960. That's actually the essence of the question. Shall there be a continuation of some kind of treaty of alliance? And shall there be a continuation of some kind of guarantee system or not? And of course the answers could be yes or no, but most answers are normally somewhere in the middle. And maybe what we know today can be substituted by something else. And there's will to look for this something else, but of course the only alternative is something that can be mutually agreed, because the default option is to remain where we are. So it's not like we're not discussing whether to have these three treaties. They are there, and they've been there since 1960. We're discussing whether we can do something about them, and if we fail, it means they will remain there. And that means there will be, so with the failure of a successful process means the guarantee system will be there in principle indefinitely, and the troops will be there in principle indefinitely. So so those who would like to change that, in particular, are the ones who need to engage in a serious dialogue about how that can be done. If somebody thinks it's okay, there is no particular urgency, if you see what I mean. So I think it's sometimes it's overlooked that there is a fallback here, which is status quo, the status quo of the divided Cyprus has been declared by the leaders, and not only these, but over time. For instance, in the joint declaration of 11th of February, as unacceptable. So they are officially on record saying that the current situation overall, I'm talking about the whole problem, is unacceptable and needs to be changed. So since the Cypriot leaders want to change something, I mean the overall, I'm talking again about the whole system, we try to support them as well as we can. There was a follow-up.
Yeah, just on the first question, what happens if the working group don't manage to find that roadmap towards the talk?
And we need a better working group. But I think, but I mean, I want to underline, maybe the word working group sounds like it's some kind of junior thing. It's the second highest or highest civil servant level that we're talking about. So these people are of course very closely connected, but they will then spend the time and energy over some days to focus on defining the problem in a way that we can talk about it in the similar, under the similar subheadings. This is actually what we're doing if you have your own understanding of what the problem is and only your own answers to that question, there will never be a solution. So you need first you have to define what the question is together, and when you know what the question is, you can start solving it. So that's the difference between the working group and the succeeding political level reconvening or session of the conference, which then will take these elements and try to deal with them in a compartmentalized manner.
Okay, don't worry, you have your chance. The lady there, and then you. Please.
Hello, Esra Eide, freelance journalist. Mr. Eide, I hear you saying EU will be important because of within the framework of the Lisbon Treaty. Can you please explain what that treaty says, which article you're referring to? And does that mean the EU will have a role that is more than an observer in the security talks? And my second question is, does that again mean that the EU will be part of the working groups that will be established?
Well, when it comes to the conference as such, there is an agreed framework that there are 5 parties. It's a 5-party conference with 5 parties, as you know, and then there is one member of the other category, which we use interchangeably as observer or interested party, which is the European Union. So they're not a participant in the conference, but they give advice and input to the conference, and that's an important compromise between which is negotiated and agreed. So we stick to that. Where the EU is relevant, they will convey expertise and support and inputs. They are not a decision maker in this process because they are not, because the negotiations as such are with the guaranteed powers and the side of the Cyprus, but they're a relevant partner, so we found this modality. And it's not very different, although the subject matter is different, it's not very different from how we have been doing it throughout the process, which is that a very active and solid EU representative with a team in Cyprus is involved whenever we discuss issues that are where the EU questions are relevant, and always with the consent of the sides, by the way. We formally ask, can he come, and then we agree he can come. So just to distinguish the 2 roles. The other part of the question is that a united federal Cyprus will be part of the EU, and over the last years the EU also has taken a role, not in no way like an alliance or anything like that, but there is a security dimension also to the EU treaty, so we have to remember them when we work on these issues. That's what I meant.
Please.
Bill, it's an expert.
Yeah, okay, I answered that. When relevant. Where and when relevant.
Maria Kognoli from the Cyprus News Agency. What will happen with the maps that the 2 sides have submitted? Will they remain the UN vault, or will they be put forward on the negotiating table once you begin again to discuss territory?
Well, they are very safely taken care of here in Palais des Nations, and they will stay there until I decide otherwise. And of course that decision will be based on what the sides want to do next on maps, so probably at some point. So when we reopen this issue or to try to arrive at the final map, we will of course make reference to the proposals, but these very days we're not looking at the maps. That was done in this exchange or this presentation session that we had between the 2 leaders, myself and a cartographer from each, who then did serious calculations with us watching and came to the conclusion that these were perfectly within the agreed parameters. Mike.
Have you decided how you will continue the discussions back in Cyprus and the agenda? Will follow once you go back?
So, under the roof of the conference. So from now on, everything is under the. This is if it succeeds, it is the final, is the end process, right? So all conversations are now happening under the roof of the Conference of Cyprus. However, in different formats, because the guarantors are solely involved when the discussion is on security guarantees. So when the sites are continuing the work that they've been doing in Cyprus, whether it's here or there, but wherever it happens, it's only them. But everything is under the roof, and that's why the statement from yesterday from the conference also points out in its second point, in parallel, the negotiations of outstanding issues in the other chapters will continue between the two sides in Cyprus. So agenda, we don't write, since we just ended actually, so we don't have an agenda for the meetings next week, but we're working on that and it will follow in the coming hours.
Jamie.
Hi, Ms. Ryder, Jamie Keaton, Associated Press. When you started on Monday, you mentioned that you expected the highest or second highest official from each of the three guarantor powers to come, and they did not. I'm just wondering, my reading of this week has been that the intra-Cyprus talks between Turkish and Greek Cypriots have proceeded relatively well, but yesterday it seems like there may have been a spoiler or two among the guarantor powers, and particularly given the comments from Mr. Erdogan today. And I just wanted to ask you, how convinced are you that the guarantor powers are actually fully committed to this idea of an agreement? Because it seems like the international powers are the ones that may be the most reticent about seeing a deal, at least more so than the Cypriots themselves.
And on the first issue, I did say on the highest or second highest level, and I believe that foreign ministers are the second highest level in most systems. You have a prime minister, and below the prime minister you have other ministers, and as a former foreign minister myself, we normally see ourselves as first among equals in that club. So I think that was fulfilled, frankly. Well, I mean, I already commented that there are good reasons to use our time effectively. Of course, in that I'm suggesting that we could use it even more effectively. But I mean, we also have to understand the highly emotional and complex nature of these things, and the conversations that you are referring to, they were on format and protocol only, and actually absolutely not about substance. But people can entertain themselves for quite some time on issues of format and protocol, and this is something you have to get used to when you're negotiating peace in Cyprus.
I have got John on my list, the gentleman there, EFE and Reuters. John.
Yes. Good afternoon, John Zarakostas with France 24. I was wondering, sir, in reference to my colleague's comment seeking a response to President Erdogan's comments, you mentioned or implied you knew what might have triggered that. Is that basically the exchange between the Turkish Foreign Minister and Mr. Juncker in the plenary session yesterday, or was it some other comment? Thank you.
I mean, the meeting was closed, even if people speak a lot about it, but just for the record, it was not that.
Hey, thank you very much, sir.
Mete Tümerkan from Havadis. I would like to ask you if the two leaders in Cyprus manages to reach, to achieve all the convergences that they are supposed to do in 3 or 4 days, and they finalize a deal on the first 5 issues, that means we have a settlement, because will still the guarantee and security issue something that should it should be agreed on? If the first 5 issues is agreed on fully?
Largely, but not fully. As I said, there are a small number of important issues that are not finally settled, and that is not a coincidence. It's because of the interrelationship between all issues, and the talks are declaredly interdependent. It's been the premise. Yeah?
No, I'm trying to say something else. If they manage to achieve full then what's next? And
but if there is full agreement on the 5, first I would be very happy, and secondly, it would of course make it even easier to conclude also the 6th chapter. But it's unlikely to happen just that way, because as I said, as I described security as a comprehensive phenomenon, some answers have to be sought in the chapter of governance, for instance. Not all security issues are in the chapter of security and guarantees, because security and guarantees principally relates to the treaties. So you could say the outstanding issues, apart from some definition issues on property, apart from those, and apart from the pending final map, which we are not very far for after the presentation of maps, apart from that, you could say there are issues that are related, even if they pop up in different chapters, and it's perfectly normal. It happens, nothing is agreed until everything is agreed, and people have to understand that in order to get something on one front, they need to give something on another front. You cannot, in order to negotiate successfully, you cannot try to win every battle. You cannot have 51% or more success in every discussion. There must be some ability to say what is most important for me, and if something else is more important for you, maybe we can find a deal.
Espen.
Here is Isabel Sacco for the Spanish news agency. Considering the complex relationship between the 5 chapters and the security guarantee chapter, do you think now that there are good proposals on the table to overcome the differences in the security chapters? And secondly, can we assume that if you convene a new conference at the political level, there is because you really feel that is the last step and there will be a deal? Just to know if you think that now there are good proposals on the table to overcome the security.
I started thinking about the second question. I forgot the first. There are, I would say, what we have shared so far are ideas and inputs and views. It's not only positions, but actually some ideas. I will not refer to them as proposals, because for me a proposal is somewhat more structured, and that's, I think, something that will come in the second phase, the civil servant level. I want to reiterate that it may sound strange, maybe, that after all these years and the fact that there's a few questions that people don't have structured proposals, but it comes in the nature that the 2 sides and their respective primary guarantor friends have had formalized positions which were unreachable. So you have to come into the space where you actually see that something can actually be done before you can move from there to a proposal. So I would say we have creative ideas. Every single intervention, both in the morning opening session, which was somewhat more formal, and in the more informal exchanges, were very interesting in the sense that people came with thoughts. They didn't came just to read loud from an old paper. But it's not yet a proposal, so this is what this group is going to do. And yes, I would say that I dare. We should always be careful with predictions, particularly about the future. I would dare to say that if you see the top leadership of the guarantors here, it is because they think that it's possible to find a solution. If there is contrafactually, I don't think so. But if there is no progress, I don't necessarily think that we need to have them here to decide that. But of course, they will come with an intent. But that doesn't mean that we're done. It would mean they will come here with a serious intent and a sense that there's a purpose of having that meeting. And again, I just reiterate strongly, it does not only depend on the work in this group, it also depends on progress on the other chapters because of the interrelated nature of the process.
Reuters.
Thank you. Tom Miles from Reuters. I was going to ask a similar question about security, but I think we've been over and over that enough. A completely different question. Do you think that after this I mean, if you get a success in these negotiations, Britain's role in terms of its responsibility towards Cyprus and its role as a sort of, I don't know what you call it, an owner of military bases on the island could be very much changed, or do you think that Britain's situation will continue to be very similar to how it is now? Thanks.
Well, I first want to say that I very much appreciate the work that Foreign Secretary Johnson and his team did here yesterday and still today, and that there is a very strong and active involvement from the UK in trying to solve this. And well, I wouldn't say, I do not think anybody expects a significant change beyond that change which will eventually happen to the guarantee system, whatever happens to that, because the sovereign bases are, nobody has proposed anything but keeping the sovereign bases there. The UK has previously promised that in the event of reunification, some parts of the sovereign areas will be returned to Cyprus as some kind of, reunification gift, and that promise has been reiterated lately. So this is still on the table. So that's of course a change of the extent of the land that is sovereign British territory, but not the phenomenon. And Cyprus is a country where almost everybody speaks fluent English and where have very strong cultural and educational and economic ties. So I would imagine that relations to a united Cyprus will just be even stronger than it is today. Okay. And of course, in this, there are other things going on in the world, including Brexit. So we of course are also following whatever implication that would have for the relationship between Cyprus and the UK, which will be part of the changed relationship between the European Union and the UK.
Yes, please.
Emine Daoud from Kıbrıs newspaper. Mr. Eide, actually you just answered my part of my question, because I'm going to ask you what about the outstanding issues that the leaders are going to discuss in a parallel level in Cyprus. As far as I understand, the property is one of the issues that they're going to address in Cyprus. But what about the others? Actually, I just really wonder about rotating presidency. Is it already discussed? Has it already discussed during these 3 days negotiations in Geneva? I wonder this. And if it is not, what is going to be happening about this rotating presidency? Is it going to be Is it going to be discussed at the final phase of the talks related with security and guarantees?
So, if you ask whether rotating presidency had been discussed, it has been discussed here and in more or less every other meeting on governance for many, many years. But there is not a conclusion to that question yet. So, in a sense, your question points in the right direction. That this is a question that has to be solved and will probably be solved in a very late phase. But of course, we are in this late phase, so late phase is not necessarily far away. Actually, to be correct, the question is about the nature of the executive, because rotating presidency is one proposal of inside the heading nature of the executive. There's agreement that there will be an executive presidency. So the question is, how it is composed, what kind of election system there is, but its roles are well defined. On property, it's correct that property, there was an early breakthrough which was quite seminal in drawing up an overall understanding of how the property regime will be. That's more than a year ago. It's early in the talks. And a very significant breakthrough, which inspired by modern European jurisprudence, is finding the way to most adequately deal both with the rights of the dispossessed owners, whose property rights will be fully respected, while also minimizing the hardship for current users. This framework is there for a long time. There's the final definitions that we've been struggling with, because, as I say, the devil is in the detail, and the small definition issues of, for instance, the nature of emotional link will have significant implications for who ends up on, let's say, what side of the equation. So these things are we still working on, and there's been some. Professor Marco, sitting in the end of the room, has been facilitating some quite interesting conversations, but they're still going on this particular issue.
And the last question, Voice of America.
Thank you. Hi. I have a totally original question to ask you, and that is this the last... Hello? Do you see me? Can you hear me? Okay, my unoriginal question. Is this the last best chance of achieving an agreement? And after 43 years of division on the island of Cyprus, are people wary enough to make the necessary sacrifices to achieve the compromises that you believe are necessary for achieving an agreement? Thank you.
So I prefer to refer to it as the best chance. There are a number of people who are saying the last chance. As you know, President Juncker said this a few days ago, and many others say they might be right. And I understand the reasons why they say this, but as the special advisor and the facilitator of the talks, I prefer to refer to it as the best chance. But I also keep saying, and I've said it a number of times even today, that I would not... People who would like a solution should try to use the best of the momentum that still exists, while it still exists, for reasons that I have answered, and others have alluded to in their questions even today. Well, I think so. The final decision is to be made by the people in referendums. I mean, one referendum, but one on each side on the same day. And we will, of course, only know when we see the outcome. But the likelihood of that being 2 yeses is very dependent on the success of the 2 leaders in agreeing to something that satisfies their own community without creating unnecessary hardship for the other community, so that both are interested in 2 yeses, not only in 1 yes. And one of the many very positive experiences I've had over these years as leading facilitating these negotiations is the very frequent reference that the 2 leaders make when they are together, that we are very much aware that you need a yes too. And there is no purpose of me getting a yes if you lose, because then we both lose. And this is something they know, and they tell each other, and they have made many statements themselves where they say they're negotiating on behalf of their own community, taking the interest of the other community into account, and in the interest of United Federal Cyprus, because many of the issues are actually not, I would actually suggest most of the issues have very little to do with whether you're Turkish Cypriot or Greek Cypriots. It's basically to have a good structure of state and a good economy for Cyprus, whoever you are, whether you're Greek Cypriot, Turkish Cypriot, Maronite, or Armenian, or foreigner, or whatever else you are. So my experience from working on other conflicts that then are overcome is that when you are in conflict, and I'm using the word conflict despite of the absence of killing and bloodshed, I mean it's a conflict because it wasn't ended, you tend to privilege that thing that defines you as 2 groups. Once the conflict is over, that issue will compete with a lot of other distinctions between people, like young and old, and men and women, and rich and poor, and north to south, or academic or not. And eventually you absorb that particular difference that is one of many, whereas conflict tends to make it the one thing in the world. So by overcoming conflict, people a few years later look back and say, what was the dispute about again? And why was this an issue? But it's very hard to imagine before. And the best way of experiencing that is to visit to some countries that have successfully got through these things and say that they still are quarreling and discussing things, but completely different things. For instance, how to use the state budget, and should there be more taxes or less taxes, and these kind of normal things. So the conflict has created, let's say, a privileging of the phenomenon of a very small difference, namely whether you are primarily speak Turkish or primarily speak Greek, although you're all Cypriots, and whether you predominantly live in the north and the south, from all other issues that you can discuss. And with the ability of Cypriots to discuss things, I feel confident that they will find enough to do even if the conflict one day is solved, which I think it will be.
Thank you very much, Mr. Eide. Thank you to everybody. Have a nice afternoon and a good weekend.